There are some silences that are louder than any scream. They're the ones that settle in the corners of a pristine home, the ones that hang in the air after a double-edged compliment, the ones that slowly convince you that you might be the one who's going mad. It's not the ghosts of the dead you should fear. It's the quiet manipulations of the living that will haunt you forever. My name is Brenda, and at 77 years old, my world has become a collection of quiet moments. I live in a small house filled with sunlight and the scent of old books and brewing tea. The hands that hold this cup are wrinkled now, a roadmap of a life lived long and hard, but they are steady. My heart, however, still remembers a time when my hands trembled constantly, not from age, but from a terror so subtle and pervasive, it felt like a poison seeping into my very soul. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like on this video. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? My story doesn't begin with a monster under the bed, but with a love story that felt like a fairy tale. It was the late 60s, a time when the world was buzzing with change, but in our small Ohio town, life still moved at a gentler pace. The seasons dictated our lives more than the headlines did. Summer meant 4th of July parades and the sweet smell of cut grass, and it was on one such sweltering summer evening at the county fair that I met Douglas. He wasn't the loudest man in the crowd, or the one performing daring feats to win cheap prizes. He was the one who stood back a little, with a quiet confidence that was far more magnetic than any boisterous display. He had a way of listening, truly listening, that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. When he smiled, it felt genuine, a warmth that started in his chest and spread across his face. We spoke for hours that night, standing near the Ferris wheel as it painted streaks of color against the twilight sky. We talked about everything and nothing, our dreams of seeing the world, our frustrations with small-town life, our favorite kinds of pie. It felt less like a first meeting and more like a reunion with a soul I already knew. I was young then, barely 20, with a spirit my father lovingly called uncontainable. I believed in grand gestures, in soulmates, in the kind of love you saw in the movies. Douglas seemed to be the embodiment of all those things. He was respectable, working at his uncle's auto shop with a reputation as a diligent and honest man. My parents were pleased, if a little cautious. My older sister, Jacqueline, was my true confidant. "He seems wonderful, Brenda," she told me one evening as we sat on the porch swing. "But just be careful. Men can be one thing during courtship and another entirely after the wedding." I dismissed her concerns as sisterly overprotectiveness. I was floating on a cloud of pure, unadulterated happiness. Douglas courted me with a gentle persistence that was impossible to resist. He brought my mother flowers from his own small garden and talked about engines with my father. He won them over, slowly and methodically, just as he had won me over. Within a year, he proposed on that same fairground where we'd met, and I accepted without a moment's hesitation. The future seemed like a brightly lit highway stretching out before me, a life of love and partnership with this wonderful man. The first shadow fell, so faintly I barely noticed it, when we discussed our living arrangements. Our dream was a small starter home on the edge of town, with a yard for a future dog and a porch swing of our own. But money was tight, and Douglas presented a solution that seemed eminently practical. "We could live with my mother for a year or two," he suggested one evening, "just to save up a proper down payment. She's all alone in that big house since my father passed. She gets lonely, and honestly, she'd love the company. It would be a huge help to her and to us." His father had died when Douglas was just a boy, and he spoke of his mother, Joyce, with a reverence that touched my heart. He painted a picture of a stoic, resilient woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her only son. How could I object? It seemed selfish to want our own space when we could be helping this woman he admired so much. "Of course," I said, my heart swelling with love for his considerate nature. I would love to get to know her better. I met Joyce for the first time over a Sunday dinner at her home. The house was immaculate, a testament to a life of order and control. Every piece of furniture was perfectly polished, every doily perfectly placed. There was not a speck of dust to be seen. It was the kind of clean that feels less like a home and more like a museum, a place where life is observed but not necessarily lived. Joyce herself was a woman of immense poise. She greeted me with a polite, cool smile and a handshake that was firm and brief. There was no warmth in her touch. She was impeccably dressed, her movements measured and deliberate. As we sat down to eat, I felt her gaze on me, analytical and assessing. I tried to make conversation, complimenting the roast she had cooked to perfection, praising the beauty of her home. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice smooth and even. "It takes a great deal of effort to maintain standards. Douglas is used to a certain level of order." Later, while Douglas and I were helping clear the table, I overheard her speaking to him in the living room, her voice a low murmur. I only caught a snippet, but it sent a strange chill down my spine. "She has a lot of spirit," Joyce said. "A man needs a steady, quiet life to build his future." The words themselves weren't cruel, but the implication was clear. My spirit, the very thing my family and Douglas claimed to love about me, was being framed as a liability. I pushed the thought away. I was being overly sensitive, I told myself. She was just a protective mother, wary of the woman who was about to become the center of her son's world. I was determined to win her over, to prove I was worthy of Douglas, to show her that I could provide that steady life he needed. We were married in the spring, in a small church ceremony filled with wildflowers and hope. For a few months, it was a dream. Douglas was a loving, attentive husband. We were building a life, saving our money, making plans. But living with Joyce proved to be a far greater challenge than I had ever anticipated. Her presence was a constant, oppressive weight. She never raised her voice, never argued openly. Her methods were far more insidious. It started in the kitchen, her primary domain. I loved to cook, but nothing I made was ever quite right. "Oh, that's an interesting way to season the chicken, dear," she would say, peering over my shoulder. "Douglas has always been partial to just a simple salt and pepper blend. His stomach can be sensitive to too much spice." When I made mashed potatoes, she'd taste them and add, with a tight smile, "A little more butter, I think. My son works hard. He needs his energy." Every meal became a quiet critique, not just of my cooking, but of my ability to care for her son. I started to dread even entering the kitchen. It extended to every corner of our lives. When I did the laundry, she would often go into our room later and refold Douglas's clothes. "I just have a particular way of doing it so they don't wrinkle in the drawer," she'd explain if I walked in on her. She would rearrange the few things I'd placed in the living room, a wedding photo, a vase I liked, moving them to less prominent positions or removing them altogether, claiming they disturbed the flow of the room. I tried to talk to Douglas about it, choosing my words carefully so as not to sound like a complaining, petty daughter-in-law. "Your mother is very helpful," I started one night as we lay in bed. "But sometimes I feel like I can't do anything right. She's always correcting me." Douglas sighed, rolling over to face me. "Honey, that's just how she is. She's not criticizing you. She's just trying to teach you how she likes things done. This has been her house for 30 years. It's a big adjustment for her, having someone new here. Just be patient with her. She's just looking out for us." His words, meant to be reassuring, made me feel worse. He didn't see it. He saw a helpful mother, and I was beginning to look like an ungrateful wife. Was I the problem? Was I too sensitive? I started to doubt myself, to second-guess my own feelings. This, I would later learn, was her greatest weapon: the ability to make you question your own sanity. The situation escalated dramatically when I found out I was pregnant. I was overjoyed, ecstatic. Douglas was thrilled, his face alight with the prospect of becoming a father. We told Joyce that evening, expecting her to share in our happiness. Instead, a strange, cold expression settled on her face. There was no smile, no hug of congratulations. "Well," she said after a long, uncomfortable silence, "I hope you know what you're getting into. A baby is an immense responsibility. It changes a marriage completely." It felt less like a piece of wisdom and more like a threat. The lack of joy for her own grandchild was a deep, cutting wound. Throughout my pregnancy, her oversight intensified into an unbearable level of control. She monitored everything I ate. "Too much sugar isn't good for the baby, Brenda." "Are you sure you should be eating that? I read an article that said it can cause issues." She criticized my desire to keep working part-time at the local library. "A mother's place is at home, preparing for her child. The stress of work can't be good for your condition." Douglas, caught in the middle, tried to play peacemaker. "She's just excited, Brenda. She's worried about you and the baby. Her generation has different ideas about these things." But I could see something else in Joyce's eyes. It wasn't just concern. It was a kind of strategic maneuvering, a quiet battle for control over the new family that was forming within her home. It was as if she saw this unborn child not as a grandson, but as the final, unbreakable link that would tie her son to me forever, and she was determined to control that link. The birth of our son, Michael, should have been the happiest day of my life. And it was. For the brief moments I held him in my arms in the quiet of the hospital room, just the three of us. He was perfect, a tiny, wonderful miracle. But the moment we brought him home, he became the new centerpiece in Joyce's silent war. "You're not holding him correctly," she'd say, swooping in to adjust my arms. "You have to support his head more firmly." If he cried, she was always there with a ready explanation that undermined me. "He's hungry. Perhaps your milk isn't rich enough." Or, "He's cold. That thin blanket isn't sufficient." She made me feel like a complete and utter failure as a mother. I was exhausted from sleepless nights, my emotions were raw, and her constant, quiet critiques chipped away at my confidence until there was almost nothing left. Her favorite tactic was to take Michael from me when I was at my most tired and flustered. "You go rest, dear," she would coo, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You look exhausted. Grandma will take care of him." And she would. She would calm him, sing to him in a low voice, and when Douglas came home from work, he would walk into a scene of domestic peace, his mother, serene and capable, holding a happy, gurgling baby. I, on the other hand, would emerge from the bedroom looking disheveled and worn out. The contrast was stark, and I knew it was intentional. She began to create a bond with my son that deliberately excluded me. She spoke to him in hushed tones, telling him stories about Douglas's childhood, stories of their family, as if my own family history didn't exist. When I would get home from an errand, I would find Douglas beaming as Joyce recounted how good Michael had been all afternoon, how he'd eaten so well for her, how he'd only smiled for her. Then, when she'd hand him back to me, Michael would often start to fuss, unsettled by the transfer. "See?" Joyce would say with a small, triumphant smile. "He's so content with his grandma." It was during this time that I noticed a shift in Douglas. A new impatience flickered in his eyes when I spoke. The easy warmth between us was being replaced by a subtle tension. He started working later at the shop, spending more time with his friends. Our home was no longer a sanctuary for him, but a place of quiet, unspoken conflict, and it was easier for him to avoid it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I tried to confront him, my voice trembling with exhaustion and unshed tears. "Douglas, we have to talk about your mother. I feel like she's pushing me away from our son." His response was a cold wall of dismissal. "You're exaggerating, Brenda. My mother is doing nothing but trying to help you. You should be grateful. Most women would kill to have that kind of support. Grateful. My voice rose, sharp with disbelief. She's trying to take my place. She's trying to make you think I'm a bad mother. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing toward the door. You'll wake Michael. He looked at me then, and his expression was not one of concern, but of exasperation. Honestly, Brenda, you're starting to sound paranoid. My mother gave up everything for me. She deserves our respect, not these wild accusations. That was the word that broke me. Paranoid. It was the first time he had used it, the first time he had so clearly taken her side, the first time he had looked at me as if I were not his wife, but a problem to be managed. He slept on the sofa that night. I cried until the sun came up, clutching my baby to my chest, feeling a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical illness. I realized then that I wasn't just in a battle with Joyce. I was in a battle for my husband's belief, for my own sanity, and it was a battle I was desperately, terrifyingly losing. The morning after that fight, the silence in the house was a thick, suffocating blanket. It was heavier than any argument, filled with the unspoken words from the night before. When I came downstairs with Michael, Joyce was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune as she polished the already gleaming chrome toaster. She turned and gave me a smile so bright and benevolent it was jarring. "Good morning, dear," she said, her voice like honey. "Did you sleep well? I've made coffee, and I saved you a pastry from the bakery." It was a masterful performance. She was the gracious, forgiving matriarch, and her kindness was a spotlight shining on my own behavior, making my desperate outburst from the previous night seem like the ravings of an unhinged ingrate. Douglas came into the kitchen a moment later, his face drawn and tired. He kissed the top of Michael's head, gave me a brief, hesitant glance, and accepted a cup of coffee from his mother with a grateful murmur. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The battle had been decided without another word being spoken. Joyce had won. In the days that followed, I changed my strategy. Open confrontation had failed spectacularly, only succeeding in painting me as paranoid and aggressive. I decided that if I couldn't win with words, I would win with actions. I would become the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect daughter-in-law. I would be so competent, so serene, so unimpeachable that Joyce's subtle criticisms would find no purchase. I would reclaim my family through sheer, relentless perfection. I threw myself into a routine with a fervor that bordered on obsession. The house, already clean, became immaculate under my care. I learned exactly how Douglas liked his coffee, how he liked his shirts ironed, the precise level of crispness he preferred in his bacon. I spent hours with Michael, reading to him, singing to him, ensuring he was always perfectly fed, perfectly clean, perfectly happy. I was courteous and deferential to Joyce, always smiling, always agreeing, always thanking her for her helpful advice before quietly doing things my own way when she wasn't looking. For a little while, it seemed to work. A fragile peace settled over the household. Douglas began to relax, the weary look in his eyes softening. He started coming home from work on time again, and the warmth slowly crept back into our interactions. He probably saw my new demeanor as a sign that I had calmed down, that the difficult phase had passed. But I was not calm. Inside, I was a tightly coiled spring of vigilance and anxiety, constantly on guard, constantly performing. It was exhausting. Joyce, of course, noticed the shift. She couldn't very well criticize a daughter-in-law who was, by all outward appearances, flawless. So, she simply changed her method of attack. Her new weapon was concern, a deep, sorrowful concern that she brandished with devastating precision. She would watch me with a pensive frown, and then later, I would hear her talking to Douglas in hushed, worried tones. "She seems so tense, son," I heard her whisper from the living room one evening, as I was putting Michael to bed. The door was slightly ajar, and her voice carried clearly. Always cleaning, always fussing. A smile on her face, but it never quite reaches her eyes. It's not natural. I worry she's bottling something up. My cousin Adele was like that right after her first was born. Everyone thought she was coping so well, and then, one day, she just broke. She was building a new narrative. I was no longer paranoid and aggressive. I was fragile, brittle, a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Every act of perfection on my part became another piece of evidence for her case. If I was tired, it was a sign of my failing constitution. If I was energetic, it was a sign of a manic, unnatural state. I was trapped in a cage of her making, and the harder I fought against the bars, the more I proved her right. The house began to feel like a pressure cooker. I had to get out. I started taking Michael for long walks in the afternoon, no matter the weather. We would go to the park, or I'd just stroll through the quiet suburban streets, pushing his stroller, breathing in air that didn't feel heavy with unspoken judgment. My only respite was a small, bright diner on Main Street called the Corner Booth. I'd go in a few times a week, sit in a booth by the window, and treat myself to a cup of coffee while Michael napped. The young man who worked the counter was a kind, cheerful boy named Tim. He couldn't have been more than 18. He'd bring me my coffee with a friendly smile and sometimes ask how the baby was doing. Our interactions were brief, utterly innocent, and amounted to no more than 5 minutes of polite chatter a week. But in the suffocating isolation of my life, those few moments of simple, uncomplicated human kindness felt like a lifeline. It was a lifeline Joyce was all too happy to poison. One afternoon, I saw her walking on the other side of the street as I was leaving the diner. She didn't acknowledge me, but I saw the quick, assessing glance she threw in my direction before continuing on her way. That evening, the attack came. She waited until Douglas was settled in his armchair with the newspaper. "I was in town today," she began casually. "I happened to walk past the Corner Booth. It's lovely that Brenda is getting out of the house more with Michael." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the payload. "She seems to have made a new friend there, that young man who works the counter. He has a very familiar way with her. People do talk in a town this small. A young married mother spending her afternoons in a diner. I just worry it might give people the wrong impression." I stood frozen by the sink, a dishcloth in my hand, my back to them. The audacity of it, the sheer venomous brilliance of her insinuation, left me breathless. She hadn't accused me of anything. She had framed her slander as a defense of my reputation. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Douglas asked, his voice muffled by the newspaper. "Oh, nothing, dear. I'm sure it's perfectly innocent. I just want to protect this family. You know how cruel gossip can be." I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "His name is Tim," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "He's a teenager. He pours my coffee and asks about the baby. That is the beginning and the end of our friendship." Joyce looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Of course, dear. I didn't mean to imply anything else. I told you I was just worried about gossip." But the damage was done. I saw the flicker of doubt in Douglas's eyes as he looked from me to his mother. He didn't believe I was having an affair with a teenage boy, but she had successfully painted me as naive and careless, a woman whose behavior required monitoring. That night, I knew I needed help. I needed an ally, someone outside the suffocating walls of that house who would believe me. The next afternoon, I went for my walk, but instead of going to the diner, I went to a payphone outside the post office. My hands trembled as I dialed my sister's number. When Jacqueline answered, the sound of her calm, familiar voice was so overwhelming that I burst into tears. "Brenda, what is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp with alarm. Through choked sobs, I told her everything. The constant critiques, the way Joyce was turning Michael against me, the whispers to Douglas, the lies about my nerves, and the latest poisonous insinuation about the boy at the diner. It all came pouring out, a torrent of fear and frustration that I had held inside for months. Unlike Douglas, Jacqueline didn't tell me I was exaggerating. She didn't call me paranoid. She listened. And when I was finished, her voice was cold with fury. "That evil woman," she said, her voice low and tight. "Brenda, this is serious. This is more than just a difficult mother-in-law. She's deliberately trying to make you look unstable. She's gaslighting you." "He believes her," I whispered into the phone, huddled in the small glass booth. "Douglas thinks she's just trying to help. He thinks I'm the one who's emotional and unstable." "Of course he does," Jacqueline said bitterly. "She's been manipulating him his entire life. He's been trained not to see it. You need to be smart about this, Bren. Don't confront her anymore. It just gives her ammunition. I want you to start writing things down. Every time she says something, every time she does something to undermine you, write it down with the date. We need a record." "A record for what?" I asked, confused. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But if things get worse, you'll need more than just your word against hers. You need proof that this is a pattern of behavior. And Brenda, be careful. A woman like that is capable of anything." I hung up the phone feeling both terrified and validated. I wasn't crazy. What was happening was real. Jacqueline's belief was a shield, and I felt stronger, more determined. That evening I tried to talk to Douglas one more time, armed with my sister's perspective and a newfound resolve. I was calm. I was rational. I laid out the facts as I saw them, explaining how his mother's concerns were actually carefully crafted attacks. "Douglas," I said, sitting opposite him at the kitchen table, "please just listen. I know you love your mother, but you're not seeing what she's doing. She's not trying to protect me by warning about gossip. She's the one creating the gossip. She's trying to isolate me from you." He listened, but his arms were crossed over his chest, his expression closed off. "So now my mother is a liar and a gossip?" he said, his voice flat. "According to who? You and your sister?" "Brenda, I heard what Mom said. She was worried about you. She was on your side. You twist everything she does into something sinister. It's like you're obsessed with her." The conversation went nowhere. He was unreachable, lost in a fog of misplaced loyalty that his mother had spent a lifetime creating. I gave up. As Jacqueline had said, talking to him was useless. Joyce must have sensed that her grip on Douglas was secure because her next move was her boldest yet. A few nights later, she orchestrated an intervention. She waited for an evening when I was particularly worn out. Michael was teething and had been crying for hours, and nothing I did seemed to soothe him. I was pacing the floor with him, my hair a mess, tears of frustration in my eyes. Joyce came to me, took the baby from my arms, and instantly calmed him. Then she went downstairs to Douglas. I could hear her voice, thick with manufactured anguish. "I'm so frightened, son," she wept. "She can't handle it. The crying. It's too much for her nerves. She was so agitated, so frantic. What if she loses control? A baby is so fragile." She didn't have to finish the sentence. The monstrous implication hung in the air between them. I heard Douglas trying to soothe her, his own voice tight with a new kind of fear. The next afternoon, when I came into the living room after putting Michael down for his nap, I found them sitting there on the sofa. And they weren't alone. Sitting in the armchair opposite them was Dr. Miller, our family doctor. He was an elderly, kind-looking man who had treated my scraped knees as a child and Douglas's bronchitis as a teenager. He looked at me over his spectacles with an expression of gentle, paternal concern. I had been ambushed. "Brenda, my dear," he said, his voice calm and professional, "why don't you have a seat? Your husband and your mother-in-law have been telling me they're a bit worried about you." My blood ran cold. I looked at Douglas, my eyes pleading with him, but he just stared at the floor, his face a mask of misery. Joyce sat beside him, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. She was the picture of a heartbroken mother, desperate to save her family. "Worried about me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why?" "They say you've been under a great deal of strain since the baby was born," Dr. Miller continued smoothly. "That you've been prone to fits of anger, and that you've been having some paranoid thoughts, accusing people of conspiring against you." I couldn't believe it. They had taken my reality, my truths, and twisted them into symptoms of a disease. I tried to explain, my voice rising with panic as I saw the trap closing around me. "It's not paranoia, it's the truth," I insisted, looking from the doctor's placid face to my husband's averted gaze. "Joyce is the one causing it. She lies about me. She tells people I'm having an affair. She tries to convince Douglas that I'm a bad mother. She's trying to drive me out." As the words tumbled out of my mouth, I could see from the look on the doctor's face how they sounded. They sounded hysterical. They sounded unhinged. They sounded, I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach, exactly like the ramblings of a paranoid woman. Joyce had not only predicted my reaction, she had counted on it. My truthful, desperate defense was the final nail in my coffin. Joyce let out a theatrical, shuddering sob. "You see, doctor," she whispered, clutching Douglas's arm. "You see what I mean? These terrible, terrible accusations. It breaks my heart." "Doctor." Miller stood up, his expression one of calm finality. He had reached his diagnosis. "Brenda," he said, his tone the one a person uses for a frightened animal or a difficult child, "I believe you are suffering from a severe case of nervous anxiety brought on by exhaustion. It's very common in new mothers. You've let things get on top of you, and your mind is playing tricks on you." He walked over to the small writing desk in the corner of the room and took out his prescription pad. I watched, frozen in horror, as he uncapped his pen. "I'm going to give you something to help you relax, my dear," he said, his pen scratching against the paper. "Something to calm your nerves and help you sleep. We'll have you feeling like your old self again, in no time." He tore the slip of paper from the pad and held it out to me. I looked from the prescription to the faces in the room. Joyce's, a mask of triumphant sorrow. Douglas's, filled with a miserable, conflicted relief. The doctor's, radiating benign professional certainty. They had done it. They had found a name for my truth and called it a sickness. They had found a cure for my rebellion and called it medicine. I was trapped, not by walls or bars, but by their united, unshakable belief that I was the one who was broken. The small rectangle of paper, "Doctor." Miller offered me felt as heavy as a tombstone. In his neat, authoritative script were words I couldn't quite make out, but I knew what they represented. It was a verdict. It was the official branding of my truth as madness. I looked at the faces around me. Joyce, performing her role as the grieving matriarch with heartbreaking perfection. Douglas, his expression a wretched mix of pity and relief, grateful to have a diagnosis for the wife who had become so difficult. The doctor, his face radiating the calm confidence of a man who believed he was restoring order. In that single crystalline moment, I understood that to fight them openly was to lose completely. To scream, to cry, to protest my sanity would only confirm their story. My only path forward was through surrender. A feigned surrender, that is. A strategic retreat into the role they had created for me. My hand, which had been trembling, became steady. I reached out and took the prescription from the doctor's fingers. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice quiet, devoid of all emotion. "You're right. I haven't been myself. I've been so tired." The collective exhale in the room was almost audible. The tension that had crackled in the air dissolved into a wave of relieved sympathy. Douglas rushed to my side, putting his arm around my shoulders. "It's going to be okay, honey," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to get you through this. You'll see." Joyce patted my other hand, her touch cool and proprietary. "That's my brave girl," she murmured. "The first step is admitting you need a little help." I was an actress on a stage, and they were my enraptured audience. They didn't see the ice forming in my veins or the cold, hard resolve solidifying in my heart. They saw a broken woman accepting her fate, and that was exactly what I wanted them to see. That afternoon, Douglas drove me to the pharmacy to fill the prescription. He held my hand the whole way, talking about the future in bright, optimistic tones, as if these little amber pills were a magic elixir that would rewind time and return me to the carefree girl he had married. I played my part, nodding and offering weak smiles. Inside, I was a silent observer, cataloging his every word, his every relieved glance. He was not my enemy, I realized, but he was not my ally either. He was a pawn, and his love for me was contingent on my compliance. That night, the performance continued. In the kitchen, Joyce placed a glass of water on the counter next to the small bottle of pills. "Time for your medicine, dear," she said, her voice gentle but firm, the way one speaks to a child. Douglas watched from the doorway, his presence a silent enforcement of the new regimen. I dutifully opened the bottle, shook one of the small capsules into my palm, and popped it into my mouth. I took a large swallow of water, tilted my head back, and made a show of the effort. But as the water went down, the pill remained, tucked securely under my tongue. "There," I said, showing them my empty mouth. "Good night." I walked to our bedroom, my back straight, feeling their eyes on me. In the privacy of our bathroom, I spit the capsule into the toilet and watched it dissolve, a tiny swirl of white and yellow in the water, before I flushed it away. It was a small act of rebellion, a secret I held in a house where I had no other privacy. It was the first piece of myself I had taken back. In the weeks that followed, I lived a double life. Outwardly, I was the recovering patient. I became quieter, more placid, letting the medication do its work. I smiled more. I stopped arguing. When Joyce offered unsolicited advice on how to care for Michael, I would thank her sweetly and comply. I allowed her to take him for hours at a time, telling Douglas I needed the rest, that the doctor said I shouldn't overexert myself. Every moment my son was out of my arms was a physical agony, a tearing at my soul, but I bore it with a serene expression. My docility was my camouflage, and it worked. The atmosphere in the house thawed completely. Douglas was attentive and loving again, relieved to have his old Brenda back. Joyce was smug, her victory so complete that she became charitable in her rule. She would praise my cooking or my cleaning to Douglas, small pats on the head for the well-behaved patient. "The medicine is truly a miracle," I heard her say to him one night. "She's so much more reasonable now." They thought they had subdued me. In reality, they had given me the one thing I desperately needed: space. With them believing I was in a medicated haze, they stopped watching me so closely. And in that space, I began to plan. I continued my secret calls to Jacqueline, updating her on the situation. Her voice on the other end of the line was my anchor to reality. The one person who knew the Brenda under the placid surface was a prisoner of war gathering intelligence. "She'll get careless," Jacqueline told me, her voice sharp with conviction. "People like her, they get overconfident when they think they've won. Just keep watching, Bren. She'll make a mistake." The mistake, when it came, was not something she did, but something she had hidden away long ago. My opportunity arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Joyce was attending her weekly bridge club meeting, a sacred ritual that took her out of the house for a solid 4 hours. Douglas was at work, and Michael was sound asleep in his crib. For the first time in months, I was truly alone in the house, with a block of uninterrupted time. My plan was born of a stray comment Joyce had made weeks before, complaining about a moth-eaten heirloom blanket in the attic. I had offered to mend it for her, and she had agreed, telling me the sewing supplies were somewhere up there in one of the old trunks. It was the perfect excuse. If she came home early, I had a plausible reason to be in the one place in the house that was a repository of the past, her past. The attic was just as I'd imagined, a dimly lit space smelling of cedar and dust, crowded with the ghosts of a life I didn't know. There were old dressers draped in white sheets, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and several large steamer trunks. I found the sewing basket easily enough, but that wasn't what I was looking for. My instincts, honed by months of hypervigilance, were screaming at me that the answers I needed were here, buried under layers of time. I started with the largest trunk. It was filled with old clothes and linens. The second held stacks of photo albums. I flipped through them for a moment, seeing a young Joyce, a smiling man who must have been her husband, and a little boy with Douglas's eyes. They looked like a happy family. What had happened here? It was in the third trunk, tucked away in a dark corner, that I found it. It wasn't a trunk, really, but a large, sturdy hat box tied shut with a faded velvet ribbon. It felt different from the other containers, more personal. The ribbon was not just a closure, but a seal. I untied it with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside was not a collection of hats, but a thick bundle of letters, all written in Joyce's neat, controlled script. But what made my blood run cold was that they were addressed to different people, yet none of them had ever been mailed. They were drafts, or perhaps just private outpourings of her venom. I picked up the first one. It was addressed to the mother of a girl named Sarah, who I vaguely remembered Douglas mentioning as his high school sweetheart. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive character assassination. "I know you must be proud of Sarah's free spirit," it read, "but I feel it is my duty as a mother to express my concern. Douglas is a sensitive boy, and Sarah's emotional ups and downs seem to be causing him a great deal of distress. I fear her instability is a poor influence on a young man with such a promising future." Instability. The word leaped off the page, a ghost from my own recent past. I grabbed another letter. This one was addressed to the wife of Douglas's first boss, a man who had been a mentor to him. "It is so generous of your husband to take such an interest in Douglas's career," Joyce had written. "He speaks of you both so fondly. I do hope, however, that his late nights at the office are not causing you any undue worry. A young man's ambition can sometimes make him blind to the temptations of the world." One after another, I read them. A letter to a favorite aunt, accusing her of trying to usurp Joyce's role as the family matriarch. A letter to the mother of his childhood best friend, implying the boy was leading Douglas down a bad path. The pattern was undeniable, a horrifying roadmap of her pathology. For her entire life, she had systematically isolated her son, seeing every person who got close to him, especially women, as a threat to be neutralized through gossip, insinuation, and accusations of instability. I wasn't the first. I was just the one who had gotten the closest. But the final, most damning piece of evidence was at the very bottom of the box. It wasn't a letter she had written. It was a letter written to her on a doctor's letterhead dated nearly 20 years prior. My eyes scanned the page, my heart pounding in my ears. It was from a psychiatrist. "Dear Mrs. Joyce," it began. "Following our last several sessions, which your husband insisted you attend, my diagnosis remains unchanged. Your recurring bouts of extreme jealousy, coupled with a persistent persecution complex and manipulative tendencies, are clear indicators of a paranoid personality disorder. I must again stress the importance of ongoing therapy and potential medication to manage these symptoms, for your own well-being and for the stability of your family." I dropped the letter as if it had burned my fingers. There it was, the truth. Not just an opinion, but a medical diagnosis. She wasn't just a difficult woman. She was clinically, chronically ill. And she had known it for decades. Her late husband had known it. He had tried to get her help. And she had hidden it, burying the truth in a hat box in the attic while she projected her own sickness onto every woman who had ever cared for her son. I carefully placed everything back in the box, tied the ribbon, and put the lid on. My mind, which had been a fog of self-doubt for so long, was now brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. I knew what I had to do. This was the proof I needed. This was what I would show Douglas. Faced with this, with a doctor's words, with her own handwritten history of malice, he would have no choice but to see the truth. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of nervous energy. I hid the hatbox back in the trunk, covering it exactly as I had found it. I went downstairs, my legs shaky, and checked on Michael, who was still sleeping peacefully, blessedly unaware of the storm that was about to break. I clutched the psychiatrist's letter in my hand, hiding it in my apron pocket, a talisman of my sanity. I waited for Douglas to come home, rehearsing the conversation in my head. I would be calm. I would not accuse. I would simply present the evidence and let it speak for itself. The hours crawled by. Finally, I heard his car pull into the driveway. This was it. The moment of reckoning. I heard the front door open and the familiar sound of his footsteps in the hall. Joyce's bridge game must have ended early because I heard her voice, greeting him. I took a deep breath, ready to walk into the living room and change our lives forever. But Joyce's voice stopped me. It wasn't her usual calm, melodic tone. It was a choked, panicked sob. "Douglas, oh thank God you're home!" she wailed, her voice breaking with manufactured hysteria. I crept to the doorway of the kitchen, peering into the hall. She was clinging to his arm, her face a mask of abject terror. "Mom, what is it? What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp with alarm. Joyce looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It was awful, just awful. Michael was crying, you see, just a little colic, and I went to check on him. And Brenda, oh son, I don't know what came over her. She just snapped. She was screaming at him, telling him to shut up. And then I saw her shake him. She shook him hard, Douglas. I was so scared I didn't know what to do." I stood frozen in the doorway, the doctor's letter clutched in my pocket, its power turning to ash in my fingers. I had been ready to expose her lies, but she had just unleashed her masterpiece, a lie so monstrous, so unthinkable, that my paper-thin proof of a decades-old illness would sound like a lunatic's desperate forgery. I was about to confront her with the truth of her past, and she had just framed me for the one crime no one could ever forgive. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The air in the hallway grew thick and heavy, charged with the poison of Joyce's words. I saw the accusation land on Douglas, saw the color drain from his face, saw his eyes widen with a primal horror. He looked from his mother's tear-streaked face to me, standing in the kitchen doorway, and in his gaze I saw a terror so profound it eclipsed everything else. His love for me, his trust, his reason. Joyce had not just accused me of an unthinkable act. She had detonated the very foundation of our world, and in that moment the calm, strategic actress in me died. The part of me that had been playing a role, biding my time, vanished in a flash of pure, white-hot rage. A sound escaped my throat, a guttural cry of a mother animal defending her young. "You lie!" I snarled, the words tearing from me. "You are a sick, twisted liar." I took a step forward, my only thought to get to her, to silence the monstrous words coming from her mouth. I saw her flinch, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. Douglas reacted instantly, moving between us, his hands up to block me. "Brenda, stop!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "For God's sake, get a hold of yourself!" His touch was like a splash of icy water. I froze, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked at the scene from outside myself. Joyce, cowering behind her son like a damsel in distress, Douglas shielding her from his hysterical wife, and me, wild-eyed and shaking with a rage that, to any outsider, looked exactly like the instability they had worked so hard to invent. I was playing my part in her script perfectly. With a monumental effort, I reined in the storm inside me. I forced my hands to unclench. I took a deep, shuddering breath and another. "Get your hands off me, Douglas," I said, my voice low and dangerously steady now. He hesitated, then slowly lowered his arms. I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked on Joyce. "You want to talk about sickness?" I asked, the quiet in my voice more menacing than any shout. "Let's talk about sickness." I reached into my apron pocket and my fingers closed around the folded, brittle paper of the psychiatrist's letter. I pulled it out. "I was in the attic today, Joyce. I found your box of secrets." I saw her composure crack, a fissure in the porcelain mask of her grief. Her eyes darted to the letter in my hand, and I saw true panic there. I held it up for Douglas to see. "This isn't a fantasy, Douglas. This isn't paranoia," I said, my voice gaining strength. "This is a letter. From a psychiatrist, dated 20 years ago. It's addressed to your mother. It names her condition, paranoid personality disorder. It talks about her persecution complex and manipulative tendencies. Your father knew. He tried to get her help." Douglas stared at the letter, then at his mother, his face a canvas of disbelief and confusion. "Mom? What is she talking about?" Joyce, cornered, proved just how brilliant a manipulator she was. She didn't deny it outright. She collapsed into a fresh round of heart-wrenching sobs. "She went through my things," she wept, burying her face in her hands. "My private, painful memories. He was a cruel man, your father. He couldn't handle a strong woman, so he tried to have me committed. He hired doctors to say I was crazy, and now she uses my deepest pain against me. Don't you see what she's doing, son? She's twisting everything to fit her obsession." It was a masterstroke. She had taken the truth and reframed it as a tragic backstory of female persecution, making me the villain for unearthing it. "And that's not all," I pressed on, my voice rising again, desperate to cut through her lies. "There were other letters in that box. Letters you wrote but never sent. To the mother of his high school girlfriend, calling her unstable. To his first boss's wife, implying he was having an affair. It's a pattern, Douglas, a lifelong pattern of destroying any woman who gets close to you. Stop it! Just stop!" Douglas shouted, pressing his hands to his temples. He looked like a man being torn in two. He looked at the letter I was holding, then at his mother, whose sobs were growing louder and more frantic. "Mom, why would you lie about her shaking Michael? That's a monstrous thing to say if it's not true." "Why would I lie?" Joyce shrieked, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "I saw it. With my own 2 eyes. I am trying to protect my grandson from his own mother, and this is the thanks I get? She is sick, Douglas. Can't you see it? These letters, these stories, she's delusional. She's a danger to that child." He was caught in the crossfire, and I could see him shutting down. It was too much. His wife accusing his mother of being a lifelong pathological liar. His mother accusing his wife of child abuse. One of them had to be crazy. And Joyce had spent months, no, years, preparing the ground for him to believe it was me. I need to think," he stammered, backing away from both of us. He snatched the letter from my hand. I can't deal with this right now." He placed the letter on the small table in the hallway, a fragile piece of evidence in a war zone, and then he turned and walked out the front door, slamming it behind him. The slam of the door echoed in the sudden ringing silence. It was just me and Joyce. Her sobs ceased instantly. She slowly raised her head, and the look she gave me was one of pure, triumphant hatred. The mask was off. "He will never believe you," she said, her voice a venomous hiss. "You are the hysterical, unstable little wife. I am the loving, long-suffering mother. Who do you think he will choose? Without another word, she turned and glided up the stairs. I was left alone in the hallway, shaking, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The letter, my one piece of tangible proof, sat on the hall table. I knew with a chilling certainty that I had to get it, that I couldn't let it out of my sight. But Michael started crying upstairs, a thin, distressed wail, and my maternal instincts overrode everything else. I ran up to his room to soothe him, to hold him, to reassure myself that he was safe. It took me half an hour to calm him down and get him back to sleep. When I finally came back downstairs, my heart pounding with a sense of impending doom, the letter was gone. The hall table was empty, its polished surface reflecting the dim light, mocking me. I knew, with the certainty of a death sentence, that Joyce had taken it. It was gone. My proof was gone. And now, my accusation about a disappearing letter would only be more evidence of my delusional state. In that moment, a cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. I had lost. I had played her game, and she had outmaneuvered me at every turn. I had tried to win with perfection, and she had twisted it into fragility. I had tried to win with truth, and she had twisted it into paranoia. Now she had escalated the war to a place from which there was no return. An accusation of child abuse once spoken could never be fully taken back. It would linger forever, a poison in Douglas's mind. I knew what would happen if I stayed. They would use her accusation. They would use Dr. Miller's diagnosis. They would use the calming medication I wasn't even taking. They would build a case, and they would take my son from me. They would break me, and they would do it under the guise of helping me. I would not lose my son. I would die before I let that happen. And so, I had to run. Douglas came home hours later, long after dark. He smelled of whiskey. He didn't speak to me. He just walked past me, his face grim, and went into the spare room, closing the door behind him. The finality of that action was a physical blow. He had made his choice. My mind, now sharp with adrenaline and terror, began to work. I had to leave tonight. I had to get Michael and disappear before they could set their final trap in motion. I waited until I was sure both he and Joyce were asleep. The silence of the house was different now. It was no longer oppressive. It was an opportunity, a cloak for my escape. I slipped out of bed and crept to the phone in the kitchen. The cord was barely long enough for me to huddle with it in the pantry. My hands were shaking so badly I had to dial Jacqueline's number 3 times. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Jacqueline," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's me. It's happened." "Oh, what happened, Bren? Are you okay?" "She told him I shook Michael," I choked out, the words tasting like acid. "She accused me of hurting my own baby." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a string of curses that would have made our mother blush. "That monster," Jacqueline finally said, her voice a low growl. "Okay, Brenda, listen to me. We knew this might happen. You have to get out of there, tonight, right now." "I know," I whispered. "But where do I go? He'll look for me at your place first." "You're not coming here," she said, her voice all business now. "Not yet. Beverly's husband, Frank, he drives a delivery truck. He's doing a late-night run to Cleveland tonight. I can call him. He can pick you up somewhere discreet away from the house. He can drop you at a bus station in the city. From there, you can get a ticket to anywhere. I'll wire you money at your destination. Do you understand?" The plan was terrifying. A bus station in a strange city in the middle of the night. But it was a plan. It was a chance. "Yes," I said. "Yes, okay." "Pack a small bag," she instructed. "Only what you and Michael absolutely need. No sentimentality, just cash if you have any, diapers, a change of clothes. Frank can meet you at midnight at the end of your street, by the old oak tree. He won't flash his lights. Just be there. I'll call him right now." "Jackie," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Just be safe. Call me when you can. I love you." "I love you too." I hung up, and for a moment I leaned against the pantry wall, letting the reality of what I was about to do sink in. I was about to become a fugitive, taking my son and running from his own father. With methodical quiet, I moved through the house that had become my prison. I found my emergency cash, $100 I had saved from housekeeping money, and stuffed it in my pocket. I packed a small diaper bag, diapers, a bottle of water, a jar of baby food, 2 changes of clothes for Michael, 1 for me, and his favorite soft blanket. My last act was to write a letter to Douglas. My hands were steady now. This was not a plea. It was a statement. "My dearest Douglas," I wrote, "by the time you read this, Michael and I will be gone. I am not leaving to hurt you. I am leaving to protect our son. Your mother has created a world of lies so convincing that you can no longer see the truth. And in that world, I am a danger to my own child. I will not stay and let her destroy me and take him from me. I have loved you more than my own life, but my son's life and safety are now my only priority. If a day ever comes when you are willing to look past her stories and find the real truth, you will know that I never, ever would have harmed our child. Until then, we cannot be a family. I didn't sign it with love. I simply folded it and left it on the pillow on his side of our bed, a bed we would never share again. Then I went to Michael's crib. He was sleeping, his small face so peaceful, so innocent. A fresh wave of tears threatened, but I choked them back. There was no time for grief. I gently lifted him into my arms, wrapping him tightly in his blanket. He stirred, making a soft noise but didn't wake. Clutching him to my chest, as if he were my own heart, I crept down the stairs, each step a small eternity of terror. I avoided the 3rd step from the bottom, the one that always creaked. At the back door, I slipped on my shoes, slid the bolt as silently as I could, and opened it just enough to squeeze through. The cold night air was a shock, but it was the air of freedom. I slipped out into the manicured backyard, a place where I had once dreamed of pushing my son on a swing set. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, cloaking the world in a deep, inky blackness. I looked back at the house one last time. It stood dark and silent, a perfect suburban home holding an unspeakable darkness within its walls. Then I turned and ran, my sleeping child in my arms, my heart a frantic drum against his small back. I ran across the damp lawn, my feet silent on the grass, towards the dark shape of the old oak tree at the end of the street, praying that freedom, and not another cage, was waiting for me in the shadows. My feet pounded against the cold, damp asphalt of the empty street. Each labored breath I took was a cloud of white in the frigid night air. Michael was a warm, heavy weight against my chest, his even breathing a stark contrast to the frantic, terrified drumming of my own heart. The old oak tree, a landmark of my childhood, now looked like a monstrous silhouette, its bare branches reaching for me like skeletal fingers. And then I saw it. A large, dark truck, parked in the shadows just beyond the tree, its engine a low, barely audible rumble. It was real. Jacqueline had done it. Frank was here. As I drew closer, the passenger door creaked open. A man leaned out, a stocky figure with a kind, weathered face I vaguely recognized from Beverly's wedding pictures. "Brenda?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. "Get in, quickly." He helped me into the high cab, taking the diaper bag and placing it on the floor before I carefully settled in with Michael. He closed the door with a quiet, solid thud that sounded like a cell door locking me out of my old life forever. Without another word, he put the truck in gear, and we pulled away from the curb, leaving my street, my town, my entire world behind in the darkness. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I stared straight ahead through the enormous windshield as we drove through the sleeping town, the familiar storefronts and houses of my neighbors looking alien and menacing in the dead of night. Every pair of headlights that appeared in the rear-view mirror sent a fresh spike of terror through me. Was it him? Had he woken up, found the letter, and called the police? Was this all for nothing? Frank seemed to sense my fear. "Your sister told me enough," he said, his eyes on the road. "You just sit tight. No one's going to bother you with me. We'll be in Cleveland before the sun's up." Michael stirred in my arms, his eyes fluttering open. He looked around the dark, rumbling cab, not with fear, but with a sleepy confusion. "Mama?" he murmured, his small hand coming up to touch my cheek. "I'm here, sweet boy," I whispered, kissing his forehead, my tears finally starting to fall, hot and silent against his cool skin. "Mama's here. Everything is going to be okay." It was a lie, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. I had no idea what was going to be okay, but I knew I would burn the world to the ground to make it so for him. The journey was a blur. The rhythmic hum of the engine, the endless stretch of dark highway, the feeling of being suspended in a strange limbo between a life that was over and a future that was a terrifying, formless void. Frank dropped me at the Greyhound station in Cleveland, just as the first gray streaks of dawn were appearing in the sky. The city was a vast, intimidating landscape of concrete and steel. "There's a bus to Denver leaving in an hour," he said, handing me my small bag. "From there you can get anywhere. Your sister said to tell you she'll be waiting for your call." He pressed a crumpled $20 bill into my hand. "For breakfast," he said gruffly, before I could protest. "Good luck to you, ma'am." And then he was gone, a silent ally who had ferried me across the border of my own life. In the cold, impersonal vastness of the bus station, I bought 2 tickets to a small town in Colorado I'd once seen in a magazine. A place so far away and insignificant, I prayed no one would ever think to look for me there. The next 3 days on that bus were the longest of my life. I barely slept, watching over Michael, rationing our meager supplies, my mind a ceaseless torment of second-guessing and fear. We arrived in the small mountain town of Silver Creek with $13, a diaper bag, and the clothes on our backs. But we were free. That first week, I found a single room for rent in the basement of an elderly woman's house. Jacqueline, true to her word, had wired money to the local general store. It was enough to keep us fed and housed for a month. I found a job waitressing at a local diner, a place blessedly different from the one back home, and another, cleaning rooms at a motel in the evenings. The work was hard, my hands were raw, and my body ached with a weariness that went bone deep. But it was a clean sort of tired. It was the ache of survival, not the exhaustion of oppression. For the first time in years, I could breathe. There was no one watching me, no one judging, no one whispering about my sanity. There was just me and my son, building a new world from scratch. Years passed. The sharp edges of my fear began to soften, though they never disappeared entirely. I was always careful, always a little guarded. Michael grew from a toddler into a bright, happy little boy who loved the mountains and had no memory of the pristine, silent house in Ohio. He was my sun, my moon, my entire universe. I saved every penny I could, and eventually we moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment above the town bakery. It was our home, our sanctuary, filled with the warm smell of baking bread and the sound of Michael's laughter. I had told myself I would never look back, but the past has a way of finding you. He came on a Saturday in autumn 6 years after I had fled. Michael, then 7, was playing with his toy soldiers on the floor. There was a knock on the door. It wasn't a familiar knock. My heart leaped into my throat with the old familiar terror. I opened the door a crack, my body tense to slam it shut, and there he was. Douglas. He looked older. There were gray streaks at his temples and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was thinner, and the easy confidence he once wore had been replaced by a deep, hollowed-out weariness. He just stood there on the landing, looking at me, his eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it stole my breath. "Brenda," he said, his voice raspy. Michael had come to stand behind me, peeking around my legs at the stranger. "Mama, who is it?" I couldn't speak. I just stared, my mind reeling. How? How had he found me? "I hired a man," Douglas said, as if reading my thoughts. "A private investigator. It took him a long time. You covered your tracks well." He wasn't angry. He was just stating a fact. Can I please come in? I'm not here to make you come back. I'm not here to take him. I just need to talk to you." I hesitated. Then slowly, I opened the door. He stepped inside, his eyes immediately falling on Michael. I saw a spasm of pain cross his face as he looked at the son he had never known. "Michael," I said, my voice shaky. This is your father." The boy just stared, clutching my leg tighter. Douglas knelt down, so his eyes were level with his son's. "Hello, Michael," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "It's an honor to finally meet you." Later, after I'd put a confused and quiet Michael to bed, Douglas and I sat at my small kitchen table. He told me everything. The story tumbled out of him, a confession born of 6 years of guilt and regret. After I'd left, he said, Joyce's behavior had become more and more erratic. With me gone, her paranoia and need for control had latched onto him completely. She monitored his calls, questioned where he went, accused his friends of turning him against her. He was living in the same pressure cooker I had been, but this time he couldn't dismiss it as a woman's nerves. It was his own life, his own sanity that was unraveling. The breaking point had come about a year after I fled. He had started quietly asking questions, talking to old family friends his mother had ostracized. He heard stories that corroborated what I had said. He finally worked up the courage to search the attic himself. He found the hat box. He read the letters. He saw the truth, written in her own hand. When I confronted her with it, he said, his voice a low monotone, she had a complete breakdown. She started screaming that I was just like my father, that I was conspiring with everyone to have her locked away. He stared into his coffee cup, his face grim. It was the first time I realized that maybe she wasn't the victim in that story either. I had to call Dr. Miller. This time, even he couldn't deny it. She was very sick, Brenda. They admitted her to a long-term psychiatric hospital. She's still there. He finally looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. I was a coward, he whispered. I was a blind, stupid coward. She spent my whole life convincing me that she was a fragile saint who needed protecting, and I believed her. I let her do that to you. I let her drive you from our home. I failed you. I failed our son. And I am so sorry. His apology, so long in coming, was a key turning a lock deep inside me. It didn't heal the wound, but it cleansed it. It acknowledged that the wound was real, that my pain was valid, that I was not and had never been crazy. We talked all night. It was a painful, necessary autopsy of our dead marriage. And in the wreckage, we found something surprising. Not the love we once had, but a new, fragile respect, born of shared tragedy. He didn't ask me to come back. He only asked if he could be a father to his son. I saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, and I knew that Michael deserved a father, especially one who had fought his way through a lifetime of lies to find him. I said yes. It was a slow process. He got a job in a town nearby and would visit on weekends. He and Michael built a relationship, piece by piece. And Douglas and I, we learned to be partners in a way we never were before, as co-parents. We learned to trust each other again, not with the blind faith of young lovers, but with the cautious, earned trust of two survivors. Years later, after Michael was grown and had a family of his own, Douglas and I found our way back to each other, not as the people we were, but as the people we had become. We remarried in a quiet ceremony with only our children present. We built a new life, a life of honesty and peace, a life we had earned. The scars of that time will never completely fade. They are a part of my story, a part of who I am. They are a reminder that the most dangerous prisons are not made of stone, but of silence and doubt. But they are also a reminder of my own strength, of the ferocious power of a mother's love, and of the unshakable truth that no one, no matter how clever or cruel, has the right to tell you that your reality is not real. I escaped the quiet madness of that house, and in doing so, I found not only my own sanity, but a strength I never knew I possessed. Thank you for listening to me today, for allowing me to share with you this intimate chapter of my life. If my story has touched you, please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to discover other testimonies like mine. And please share it, because who knows, maybe someone going through a similar trial right now will find the courage to keep searching, to hope, to believe in the impossible. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me.